So being a lawyer, I keep coming back to understanding a few concepts around the impact ecosystem. The question in this regard is, have investors and entrepreneurs figured out the apparent dichotomy between impact and profitability, and what are they doing to resolve this apparent dichotomy? Or do you believe actually that there is no dichotomy and that impact and profitability can go hand in hand?
So I think in the ideal world, yes, the two can go hand in hand. There's no question, and I think that's the utopian model all of us are kind of chasing. At the same time, I think we just have to probably, to achieve that, redefine what we mean by impact and what we mean by profit. I think today's definitions is really probably where kind of a relook is probably required. But I strongly believe that you shouldn't and you cannot separate the two. You have to make sure that sustainability, economically, financially, and impact have to be kind of thought about in the same way. However, I think it's very important for people to figure out what comes first, and what is the real purpose of being in that business. There are obviously models where you're looking at impact first and then saying profit and sustainability is really how I get there, but that's not the reason for my existence. But I have to achieve it. It's part of the bottom line that I have to deliver. Or you say, no, I'm actually focused on delivering a great business, but in the space of impact, and whatever impact happens out of that, I will measure, I will make sure it's done, but I'm not going to hold myself if eventually this problem doesn't get fully resolved, because I'm kind of here to actually contribute to that solving of the problem. There was a brilliant report that was released by the European Venture Philanthropy Association about 4 months ago in their annual event in Poland, which talked about investing for impact and investing with impact, and they kind of separated the two concepts. Investing for impact was to really deliver the models and the and the ways of doing it, and actually demonstration of that these things can actually do impact at scale. And that probably is a smaller ecosystem. We all know that the impact ecosystem of capital in the global context is very, very, very small compared to the trillions of dollars of investing ecosystem out there. But investing with impact could actually then come in and complement that quite significantly. So I think you have to be clear about what stage you're in, and hence what the type of capital. I think by definition of what stage, what sector, because also it's very, very different to look at education and livelihood, and more mainstream capital can come in much faster in livelihood than in education, because education is almost a social need rather than livelihood also, but how much livelihood and how the markets play out, you have a much stronger play there than a market play, let's say, in education, or even healthcare to some extent, which has to be more regulated. So I think it's important to kind of look at it from that context of definition of impact, whether we're talking about livelihood or education, or what kind of impact and what kind of capital we are talking about. But at a very, very fundamental principle level, the two cannot be separated, and I think there needs to be a good balance of the two.
While I take your point, in practice, the usual response has been that invariably at some point in time in an entrepreneur's journey, he has to eventually make a choice between, am I going to be profitable, or am I going to continue to make impact but not be profitable? How does he choose at that particular point in time, and is it a fair choice? Or are there other creative solutions that can enable him to achieve double bottom line?
So I think the choice has to be made, which is my earlier point of, you have to decide whether you're impact first or finance first as an entrepreneur. There's no question. But I don't think the choice is between impact and no profit as much as it's impact and lesser profit or delayed profit, right? So I think that's the real game. I don't think impact and no profit, I don't think you can sustain, right? And as an entrepreneur, I'll tell you from my perspective, we are very clear we're impact first. We're here for impact. Now, real example, a non-profit from Kolkata called, or a Mumbai non-profit, they're small organizations creating great impact, and they want a part of our services, right? And you look at it and say, okay, but we are here for impact. I will potentially, they may not be able to afford, let's figure out how much they can afford to pay and still work with them. If I had a business lens only, I may have said, okay, you don't fall under my per project profitability ratio, so hence I may not be able to kind of work with you. I know by working with them it's going to reduce my bottom line a little bit, but I know I create much stronger impact because they're working in niche areas, in niche locations where so much help is not available. So these are the calls you take. So it's, I would say, impact for somebody who's very focused on impact, the choice is between profit today and how much profit. Are you still talking about 20-30% IRR kind of a number? Are you okay with lesser with you and your investors? Plus, are you okay to a little more delayed, kind of a conversation? Because I think eventually this sector will kind of raise above the current norms of pay and all that stuff, because eventually I think we'll all figure out that it's more important to solve some of these burning social issues than deliver pizza 5 minutes faster, right?
If that is effectively what one would characterize as patient capital, the concept of delayed profit, why do we not think on the lines of the law introducing more tools to enable entrepreneurs to get the benefit of delayed profitability? For example, in the US you have what has been mooted is a concept of a flexible light yield paper. It was actually mooted in a book written by 2 or 3 lawyers from the US who have actually examined how law can facilitate the growth of social enterprises. And they conceptualized the flexible light yield paper as being a moderate yield debt instrument, which typically will convert to equity, or will, in the event of there being a shift in the prioritization from impact to profitability, then there is some kind of penalty that is imposed on the entrepreneur. Would a tool such as that work in the Indian context? Should there be discussions around having such tools?
No, I think there's a tremendous urgency to talk about tools like that, and I don't think enough conversation is happening, and urge more lawyers to have that conversation, because I think this is definitely something, or at least facilitate that conversation, because I think we need tools beyond Section 8. I think all conversations eventually end up in Section 8.
Because Section 8, the problem is one of access.
Access, and there's no return.
If there's no return, there's no one who's willing to actually put money into a Section 8 company.
Absolutely. Right.
So you need something that is not Section 8, that's not a private company, and that's not a trust.
Exactly.
So all existing legal forms today are inadequate for somebody who wants to do both.
Absolutely, no question about it. Whether it's a legal structure or it's an incentive, whatever, we need to figure out
an instrument. Yeah.
Something has to be figured out. But I think very much required. 2 important discussions are happening in the social impact space, right? One is of capital becoming more efficient. Today more and more conversation is happening for models which are going to be closer to pay for performance rather than just give input and hope that impact happens. Development impact bonds, and a lot of those conversations are trying to bring in a lot more efficiency into the current capital that's already there in the ecosystem, and saying, hey, can we more focus on outcomes and output rather than just trying to do impact, which was the old grant model of program-based thinking. At the same time, I think structurally there's a lot to be done, because today the ability to absorb different types of capital, to be able to kind of also give it different colors, right? Within your own ecosystem or within your own financial structure, it's not so easy. And how do you kind of deal with some of these things? I think there is legal and financial tools and instruments which can aid the acceleration of people wanting to do impact, to get closer to models that are required to do impact. I think is very much required. I think a lot of us are today probably, from a mindset point of view, already in the middle of how do you create a model which has the balance between profit and impact, but we're using tools which are more traditional profit tools or more traditional impact tools, and I think that shift is happening in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, where the legal and the financial statutory instruments will not, let's say, create a boundary for you. But that same innovation should happen, in instruments that are more statutory in nature.
Speaking of which, I mean, the current flavor in the for-profit ecosystem has been the whole debate around the angel tax, right? But when you look at the social impact ecosystem, again, is there any conversation around whether there are sufficient tax incentives that have been created for the for-profit social impact ecosystem? Can the government do more in terms of tax incentives? Because tax is also a tool just as much as innovative financial instruments and innovative legal instruments as well.
Yeah. So I think today, to a good extent, in sectors like agri and solar and a few other places where there's natural incentives being created for more of it, I think those are some of the areas where I can imagine some advantage that can be taken. But I don't think it's seen from the perspective of the overall impact ecosystem. There's also an implementation challenge with that, because impact overall as an ecosystem is too broad. I think we may have to kind of have one structural larger conversation on Section 8 trust-ish kind of conversation, but at the same time go down to more micro, saying, hey, in agri what should the incentive be? In education what the incentive be? So I think we need to work at both of those levels. I don't think there's sufficient conversation happening. GST, for example, right? That I don't think that the social sector conversations have been included in that. I mean, I know people in the sports industry are still kind of advocating for different things because it's seen as a sector that needs promotion. So I think I don't think there is a common thinking around that. Also because I think it's definitionally difficult, and fortunate or unfortunate, there is no one kind of body representing the ecosystem. There's no impact ecosystem body, right? Everybody is doing their stuff. If you were to call, if let's say the PMO wants to call somebody in the impact ecosystem or in IT, you would call NASCOM, you would call CII, or you would call a sportscom now for sports. But for impact, who do you call? Right?
Should there be a CII chapter for social impact?
I think that those things have been tried because of diversity of thinking, the for-profit, non-profit, the color of money, so it's not been very successful. We've been part of a few conversations like that. But eventually, if as an impact ecosystem we were to go lobby on some of these things, there has to be a platform that kind of puts it all kind of together, or it will be, the angel, the impact investors will go lobby separately, the agri entrepreneurs potentially will go separately. So then you'll again, you'll create, I think, more confusion potentially. Maybe that could also work, but I think that's kind of what is the definition, and the platforms are kind of what is missing. The people who leveraged most of these incentives the best are the ones that were able to come together, right, as an ecosystem.